why, how, what of circular economy. Matthias already introduced me briefly. I don't have that much to say already, but as you can see, I am a lecturer at HEC Paris, which is a university in France. I'm also lecturing at Toulouse Business School at the University of Las Palmas, where I have been academic director in the expert course for circular economy and isolated territories. Then I'm also a researcher, where I'm doing here my PhD on circular economy business model innovation. And as a consultant, I've been helping the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So I have here the experience of policy making and how you have to deal with different stakeholders at global level. And that was very nice. That was when I was with Sergio back then at the Vice Council doing the internship. Yeah. So basically, let's put a little bit in the context. Matthias asked me a little bit to put us all on the context of what is circular economy before. So I think it's important. I don't know if anyone has read this before. It's a great book. It's from Kate Raworth. She's a great economist. And she basically simplified it very nicely with this diagram. And she said, okay, we need to find a safe and just space for humanity. So how can we remain within the donut where we don't overshoot the planetary boundaries and we don't fall short on the basic needs that we need to maintain a sustainable economy, a sustainable life. And I think here, circular economy fits very nicely because it helps you to maintain that balance. And we're going to see, basically, quite briefly, what is a circular economy. We can summarize it in three main principles. The first one, this comes from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is a renowned foundation institution in circular economy. And it says, okay, first we need to design out waste and pollution. That's actually the most important one, because you need to already, by design, avoid that waste is created in the first place. The second one is about, okay, once the products are out there, what can we do to keep them in use as most as possible and at their highest value so that they don't end up being discarded. And let's make it possible that if they are being discarded, this will be more for the biological cycle, not the technological cycle. Then make it possible that it regenerates nature, so it leaves it better than it was before. And so basically, that's very simply make waste as a linear economy, and a circular economy would mean let's keep them in use as much as possible, and you have different R's. It all goes to an R ladder, you have the refuse, all up to recycling. And this is basically what I was mentioning before, where you have the biological cycle and the technical cycle, and it's all about maintaining the resources in use as most as possible, and as you can see, you have different strategies. Maintaining, reusing, refurbishing, and recycling is the last thing that you want to do. Usually in circular economy, people think, yeah, it's all about recycling, right? No, actually that's what you try to avoid, and then if you cannot do it anymore, well, let's try to do it the best way possible. So, now that we have set the context, let me go you through with the agenda of what we will be doing today. So basically the why. I use this structure also when I teach in executive education. I use a why, how, what. It's very easy to grasp the key concepts. The why here is, why do we need to move towards a circular economy in the European Union? So we're going to see how does the European Union argue why they need to move towards a circular economy. Then how? So how are they actually doing? What are they putting in place? What type of policies are they putting in place to push it forward? Then the what would be, what has the EU done so far and is currently doing to facilitate the transition towards a circular economy in Europe? And then I hope that we have time. We'll have a Q&A round table of discussions. So let's get started with the why. So as you see here, the EU is moving towards a circular economy for three main reasons. The first of all is it's reacting to the scarcity of critical resources. The second reason is it's exploring opportunities for a competitive and sustainable EU economy. And the third reason is it's trying to align with stakeholder demands across the EU. So let's deep dive into each one of them. We won't have time to really deep dive into this one. I just decided to deep dive a little bit into reacting to scarcity and aligning with stakeholders. But don't worry, because I guess you will have the slides after this, hopefully. If not, I can share them with you, and you can see the deep dives. Because 45 minutes is quite short for, this is usually 90 minutes when you teach this. Anyways, so reacting to scarcity of critical resources. So what are the key points to know here? The EU basically is on a supply of raw materials which is tight and is concentrated in the hands of a few players. And this is already compromising the strategic autonomy of the EU. Then what we also have is that there's an increasing demand for critical raw materials that is threatening the EU, so basically the EU Green Deal, to move towards a green and digital transformation. And where we need a lot of critical raw materials. And on the other hand, you also have that there's a high reliance of the EU on imports, which is already affecting its trade. The EU basically needs to import everything, more or less. It's not like China, that they have a lot of control. So let's deep dive into the first point, which would be the supply of raw materials is tight and concentrated in the hands of a few players. So what you see here is that the EU realized quite not long ago, but they realized, okay, China is controlling everything. China has basically the monopoly of everything. Not only if you know the mining value chain, you have the extraction, you have the processing, where you also do the refining, and then it continues and it becomes the product that you want. So as you see in extraction and in processing, China, for example, for rare earths, is controlling it totally. It also makes sense because it's where all these rare earth materials are basically located in China. And they have become experts in processing. Then we have, for example, it's interesting to see lithium that is super needed for the whole batteries and EV vehicles. You have Australia and Chile is where it is, but who is in charge of doing the whole processing? China. And that already puts a lot of control to China. A lot of bargaining power of saying, hey, we set the price, we set the tariffs, we set how much you get, how much you don't get. So this is already putting EU in an uncomfortable position to negotiate. Then, as I mentioned, with the strategic autonomy of moving towards green and digital, here you can see more or less a Sankey diagram, where you see where the materials go for what, right? You see renewables, defense, and space. And here the problem is that if you know critical raw materials, what are they characterized by? Well, they have a high economic and strategic importance. They also have a high supply risk of being disrupted. China can just say, hey, well, we're not delivering to you. Limited sustainability, so not all of them can be just substituted for something else. We have not reached there. There's a lot of R&D going into it of how we can substitute them, but we're not there yet. Then moving to the last point here is about the trade. As you can see, there is a trade deficit. You see here the imports and the exports, and there's a deficit of 28. I think we're talking here about 28 million or billion. I don't remember the figures. It must be huge. And so basically, there's a trade deficit, and here what we try to do, the EU is going more towards a protectionist policy, of more saying, okay, we need to see how we can secure our critical raw materials needed for the transition, and put a lot of emphasis on making it more secure and resilient. Because they also have the experience, as you saw with the COVID, that they were also quite disrupted with everything. The whole world was disrupted. So you also realize globalization is nice, but up to what point? And at what point do you become really protectionist, but you're still open for trading? So that's the deal. Okay, so exploring opportunities for a competitive and sustainable EU economy. So they want to really still be at the head of everyone, because you have China, you have the US, and what can still the EU do to remain competitive? So they see circular economy as a way of remaining competitive, because they argue it from a cost perspective. Say, hey, we can save so much, 600 billion of euros per year, just by going towards resource efficiency. And then they say, hey, it can give us a lot of resilience against commodity price volatilities. Where at some point the prices for lithium is huge, and then the whole supply chain for automobiles and EV is compromised, right? And then how do they continue? So this can give them a lot of resilience. And then, of course, you have here the opportunity cost of not doing it, of falling behind. If you don't act now, what can happen? You have the rivalry between the US and China, which is very present. And then we have here circular economy as a policy solution to the environmental crisis. So really they see it as it's a key pillar in the EU Green Deal, and they really put a lot of emphasis on saying, hey, it can help us also tackle climate change. It can help us also tackle the triple planetary crisis. see how much greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced. That's also the argumentation. But I think the competitiveness is stronger than saying, hey, we do it for also the environment. I believe that's from what I have read all, is really there's a strong argument for cost savings. Then of course, stakeholder demands. Politics is all about politics, you know, from citizens to academics to policymakers, politics is everywhere. And of course, they do a lot of pressure. And we're going to see how is this pressure, where does this pressure come from? So you have from one side, pro-circular economy companies, companies that are interested in that the EU moves more policies that can favor them. I don't know to which point this is still changing the status quo of sustainability, but there is a lot of interest of the business side saying, hey, please move towards a circular economy and make policies on this side. Then we have a lot of citizen pressure. And there's via the citizens platforms that we will see. And we have more and more support for green parties, right, that are willing to push a change towards a more circular economy situation. So let's deep dive into each one of them. This is actually a very interesting case that I read in one of the academic papers that analyzed the Juncker Commission. So the Juncker Commission, or Juncker, however you want to pronounce it, he said he had the task to come up with, the whole team, of the Circular Economy Action Plan of 2015 was the first one. Then there's the second one that came after the EU Green Deal in 2020. But basically, he faced a lot of resistance, as you see here in this image, of industry lobbying, right? They were like all against it, of saying, no, 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 this is very bad for us, don't do it, up to a point that he said, okay, we don't go for it. It's fine, you won. But the problem was that you see here different companies. These are all huge multinationals, a lot of money behind. Plus national governments and member states that say, no way that you are not bringing the plan forward. This has to go, this has to happen. And you did pressure, and then you said, okay, well, we'll do it, because there was a lot of criticism. So you see up to what point you can say, okay, we go for it, and let's see now, you've seen von der Leyen, right, for the next term of 2024, 2029, I think it's gonna be. We're gonna see if she gets re-elected and how she's gonna deal with all of this. If she's gonna still preserve the EU Green Deal, which is her plan, I saw it, but still, is it gonna be, I think she has to deal with the Conservatives, and it's not an EU, the Green Party majority. So, of course, a lot of politics. Citizens, you might know this, Fridays for Future, famous Greta Thunberg, and Extinction Rebellion, very big groups that do a lot of pressure to push towards changes in regulation. Particularly, they do a lot of pressure in fossil fuels. Then, as you see, there's a rise in Europe. There are many green parties, which, at least where I live in Germany, they have gained a lot of importance, but as you can see in Europe, there's still a very strong rise in the extreme right, which is going to compromise all the plans that Europe has been doing until now. We have in Germany Alternative for Germany, Alternative Deutschland, and that is quite strong. Okay, so moving to the next point, we are on the how. Here again, there are three areas to consider that we should understand on how the EU is moving towards a circular economy. So it's super interesting to see that there is a technocentric discourse positioning. I will go to that further. As you see, I have some deep dives planned, so stay with me. Then we have aiming for a circular modernism future. And we have establishing pressures on 3 levels. So this is basically how we can understand in a very simple but concise way how is the EU planning on moving towards a circular economy. So if we deep dive into technocentric, this is a marvelous framework which was done. I just did these icons, you know, in academic you don't have these pictures. You just have the letters. Anyways, so this is Martin Callisto-Freund, which I remember I spoke with him. I said, hey, talk to me more about your framework. And it was super nice. So he really analyzed all the discourses, all the policies, all the directives that are out there from the European Union, and packed it into this framework. This framework, he already did it before, and he tested this framework with these policies. Super nice. And I'm not going to deep dive into all, but basically, as you see on the bottom, you see how the approach to social and environmental and political considerations can be. It can be either fragmented, or holistic. And then we see over there on the left the vision about technological innovation and ecological collapse. So basically you can think of that, if we start with the left side of short explanation, you can be optimistic or skeptical. Optimistic saying, hey, if we manage to decouple economic growth from resource depletion, resource extraction, we're good. As long as we do this, we're good. And we're good with capitalism. Capitalism is the way. This one says we should continue as we do with our common form of capitalism. This one is more like, hey, we should have a reformed form of capitalism. Kind of adapt it more to the planetary boundaries. Put that framework in mind. Very simplistically explained here. Then if we go into the skeptical areas, more like, no way, we cannot continue growing. We need to move towards degrowth. Degrowth is the way. And if we don't stop how we're moving forward, we will not reach anywhere. We will for sure surpass every limit possible. So, okay, with this in mind, basically the EU is here. The EU, for now, they are not aiming for degrowth, they're aiming for growth. And a continued form of growth of where we are decoupling. What was interesting that he found out there's a dichotomy between the blah blah, what they say, the talking. The talking is here. Hey, we still need, but still optimistic, right? Optimistic, very optimistic, saying we should remain within the planetary boundaries, we need a reform from capitalism, but it's possible to continue growing. And then the actions. The actions are basically more technocentric, saying innovation, we need a lot of innovation. Innovation is the key to move forward. We need a lot of R&D, technology, like putting AI, let's say, that's the key to saving everything. And here's more frugal innovation, trying to do the same thing that you can with the less resources as possible, right? Anyway, so I found that very interesting so that we understand how is the EU talking. Then, also interesting here, they aim for a circular modernism future. What this means. This guy was also inspired by the guy that we've seen before, as you can tell, you can relate, like it's a similar framework. Also, interesting concepts. But let me explain it here. We have central governance, decentralized governance, low-tech innovation, high-tech innovation. So we see that the EU's approach to circular economy is dominated by circular modernism. There's still central governance, there's still some control from the EU of saying, hey, this is how we should do it. But there's very strong emphasis on high-tech innovation. Then we have that they are trying to combine, as we see here, there is a gradual shift towards a hybrid approach of planned circularity, which was the second most seen in the studies that this guy saw while analyzing all the policies of the EU. He also placed it into this framework. I said, this is the talking, and what they present is more on a circular modernism. However, also, their actions are also a lot of planned circularity, so there's a lot of control with regulations, directives, trying to maintain the control, basically. Decentralized government, it's all top-down. Okay, so this is super interesting, and I guess some of us here in the room that are into research know this has to do with the institutional theory. So the different isomorphic pressures, right? So you have here coercive pressures, you will have normative pressures, and you will have mimetic pressures. This shapes how an organization behaves. For sure, we have here Sergio, you can also back me up on here with institutional theory, right? I think this is a lot seen in organizations when we try to explain why you behave in a certain way. This can also be applied to governments. Why are they behaving in a certain way? And how they influence that behavior. They influence through coercive pressure, so this can be seen through laws, and based on a system of regulations, sanctions, and rewards. Normative pressures, so this will be more promoted through certain types of norms, recommendations, and standards. So this is more not that into you can do it or you cannot do it. This is more of a, it is recommended that you rather do it this way. And then mimetic pressure is here very clearly, is imitating the behaviors that others have perceived similar. So here it would be more the EU behaves in a certain way because this has been inspired of how is this being done in other countries, be it US as an example. And normative pressures, okay, we should put certain recommendations. This is more, I believe the EU is basically all the time here in these two types of pressures, coercive and normative, which we will see that in detail in the what. So, the what. The EU has done, and is doing many things to facilitate this transition towards circular economy in Europe. And basically, again here I have some key messages. We have the overarching strategies complemented by sector-specific ones. So the EU has developed certain types of strategies to guide the CE transition. And I think the key, the mother of the whole strategies, it would be like the Circular Economy Action Plan that sets the baseline of everything that will continue. Then there are, I just put 12, but there are for sure more than 12 legislations. We know that the EU, they are the champions in world regulations for everything. There's a regulation. So there's a lot of regulations. I try to just put some of them so that you can see and grasp what I mean. And of course there are also tools and EU funded projects. Here I will show you some of them because I said that there's not much time. So let's go for this one. Here you can see I prepared it like this quite in a nutshell, most interesting overarching strategies that are complemented by sector-specific ones. So as you can see here, there's also for textiles, there's also in agriculture. This one making sustainable products to norms, so the Eco-Design Directive. Then you see that it all started with a roadmap to a resource-efficient Europe, and then finalized here now, this is like the pillar, a new Circular Economy Action Plan for a cleaner and more competitive Europe. So there's a bunch of strategies that are guiding the way, but it's important to know here that they are non-binding, so just to guide you through. So this is normative pressure, right? It's just ways to streamline how you could move forward, which is still great. You're doing a great job. And this is where I decided to do a quick deep dive. Let's see, time-wise, I don't know, time? Okay, I have some time. So, the circular economy is a cornerstone, as I mentioned, to deliver the EU Green Deal ambitions. And this is more or less what the Circular Economy Action Plan aims to. Honestly, this, as I say above, non-binding, it's just inspiration and direction, and I would say, as also found by other researchers, really a quantitative target that exists there is mainly this one, of doubling the circular material use rate. And it's not looking good. It's not looking good. Now we'll show you. Right now, we're far away, by far from that target. But let's see what happens in the next years. Anyways, then decouple economic growth from resource use. Keep the EU resource consumption within the planetary boundaries. So the talking, remember the donut economics framework that I showed you before, and the thinking of a circular society, reducing the consumption footprint, reducing the total waste generation, having the amount of residual municipal waste within a decade, and really, where do they focus more? They put a really strong priority on electronics, communication technologies, plastics, packaging, where they believe that's where they can have the most impact. Okay, so more than 12 legislations. Here I put also again some of them, and I believe also super interesting ones. We have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Have you heard of it before? Well, this is more to businesses. So I don't know how much into businesses you are, but if you're helping businesses that have a certain amount of employees, a certain amount of revenue already for the next year, they have to report about how the 2024 went. And they have a certain type of criteria that they must report on. Now, circular economy being one of the mandatory criteria, and they have to report on different indicators and really show their progress. And then so that they kind of held accountable to the public, like become more transparent. Really so that the consumer has more awareness, more perfect information, so to say, about how are companies moving towards sustainability, circular economy. We have here also, have you heard of this one? Green Claims Directive, super powerful also. That's about greenwashing. You're saying that this has been done with ocean plastics, and it's super nice because we're contributing to reducing the impact, but in the end of the day, it remains a plastic bottle. So you should not be encouraging that. You should be encouraging not to take that plastic bottle, just take your own bottle. So they're really this can, at some point when it becomes binding, they can sue you. So the citizens, the governments can sue a company and say, hey, you say this, but then you do something else. It's all greenwashing, so it's to held accountable. Also, this one very strong. This one we again see this arises from what I mentioned, the Critical Raw Materials Act. That comes from the resource security perspective of, hey, the supply is highly concentrated, there is a high demand for the digital and green transition, we have to kind of regulate this. Then tools and EU-funded projects. So here I divided it in tools and EU-funded projects. Tools we have here, very nice one, which is the monitoring framework. And then we have the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, which is very powerful. I met the chair of the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. I talked with her, and it's really interesting how important it is, these platforms, to send the message to the policymakers. And it's kind of the transition between the citizens and the policymakers. And they still continue. It was meant to be a short project, but it was so successful that they continue with that stakeholder platform. And then we have the digital product passports to have more traceability of where that product comes from, what material is in there, so that I, Julita Lopez, want to recycle that. I know what exactly is in it and how easy it would be for me to reuse it. This is already being seen in textiles and batteries. Then for EU-funded projects, I think we have the expert here, Matthias, you know a lot about this, so I don't know that much, but I saw there are different funds. It's a lot of money flowing in from different points, so be it Horizon, be it Life, Circular Cities and Regions Initiative, where I am in Munich. They have received some funding for a pilot project of becoming a circular city, and we are advising them in their circular economy strategy. So I wanted to just do a deep dive on the monitoring framework, because I remember Matthias also told me, hey Julia, bring me in some indicators, some numbers, how is this all working? I tried my best. If you want more detail, I can still share it with you, because I've tried to make it as easy and concise as possible. So here you can see that if they want to track how is it at EU level, the transition towards circularity, they have this framework which is divided into 5 categories. And within those 5 categories, in total there are 11 indicators with their sub-indicators. And I find very interesting that they indeed, you see also reflected in what I'm talking, the reasons also that I gave before on the why. You see that they've put a strong focus on monitoring the secondary raw materials, competitiveness and innovation, and resilience, the importance of resilience, and this is a new one that came recently. So, and if not, we have production and consumption and the classic waste management. And, oh, that skipped, but it's basically here, circular material use rate. I just wanted to do a deep dive because you remember that I mentioned we're still far behind from the goal, which would be 2030, 25.6%, and we are in 11.5% at EU level. Of course, different countries have different circular material use rate, but also super interesting that we are still lacking way behind. Okay, and this would be for the projects, and I decided to just show on tourism, the ones that I have been also part of interviewing and also finding how the whole thing works with their projects. Of course, I also proposed a twin by stars, because there's still some circular economy component there. It's not the thing, but it's still a pillar, like climate also. But there are so many, and there's still, like, you can see when you see the funding proposals of the EU that they had one big one. I think they allocated 10 billion, could be. A lot of money just for, or 10 million, wait, perhaps it's 10 million. Anyways, don't hold me accountable for this. In any case, they allocated a bunch of money for a call for proposals of moving towards a sustainable tourism with circular economy principles. This has been closed, it was in February, but you still see a lot of projects, be it from Interreg, be it from Horizon, be it from Erasmus+, that are present. Yeah, that's it for me.
Wow. Muchas gracias por este auténtico tsunami de información.
Sí.
Cuando recuperemos del shock, No, muy interesante, a mí me parece extraordinariamente interesante y creo que, no sé a ustedes, pero esa visión que permite marcar no solo una conceptualización, sino también la institucionalización del contexto europeo de la política de la economía circular, es clave, aunque solo sea, yo creo, muchas veces para inspirar el discurso. Me interesó mucho esa parte que decías tú, ¿no? De la diferencia entre la Europa retórica y la Europa empírica, ¿no? Sí. Pero es verdad que muchas veces el lenguaje de los proyectos es un lenguaje que tienes que casi copiar y pegar esa retórica para que suene la música, y a partir de que suene la música puedes que sigan leyendo el resto del proyecto, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, yo creo que ha sido muy interesante para centrarnos muy bien en el contexto de la economía circular. Quizá nosotros, eso ya es una cuestión más empírica. Yo lo que creo es que lo que hablábamos al principio de empezar a ver una colaboración más en perspectiva, es que sí que seguramente nos interesará mucho descender estos niveles de análisis a ámbitos territoriales sectoriales más específicos, ¿no? Relacionados con los sectores y los territorios en los que solemos trabajar, ¿no? Y el tipo de programas también a los que solemos acudir para la financiación, ¿no? Y enhebrar todos estos elementos para incorporar el marco de la economía circular de una manera robusta y bien argumentada en todo, digamos, el argumentario. Pues, sobre todo estoy pensando en proyectos, ¿no? En proyectos de distintas convocatorias europeas, ¿no?
Bueno, lo primero, felicidades por la presentación.
Gracias.
Bastante interesante. Yo quería preguntar una cosa, o sea, acerca de tu opinión, sí, con respecto a lo mejor no la propia economía circular per se, pero, por ejemplo, o sea, todos somos conscientes de que al final hay que hacer una transición hacia costumbres o modos de vida más sostenibles, ¿no? Una realidad innegable que el cambio climático existe, ¿no? A que se necesita no verlo. Ahora bien, por ejemplo, con respecto a los modos de transporte, ¿no? Si queremos incentivar, por ejemplo, el uso de coches eléctricos o modos un poquito más sostenibles, al final también somos conscientes de que los precios son altos, ¿no? Entonces, a mí solamente se me ocurre que para aquellas personas que a lo mejor no se puedan permitir optar a esas vías más sostenibles, el gobierno tiene que dar algún tipo de subvención, ¿no? Y lo mismo para aplicarlo a distintas índoles. ¿Es realmente sostenible esto en el largo plazo? Es mi preocupación.
La pregunta que se debería hacer uno no es más como damos una subvención o no, pero es que eso influye si vamos aquí, porque ya que está aquí, es tan bonita y le gustó tanto a Matías, vamos a ver. ¿Dónde está? Lo tengo aquí. Bueno, incluso que si vamos a lo de la, centralized governments, al final también está mucho apoyo con las subvenciones. La pregunta es, que creo yo que se debería hacer uno, que por eso vamos a es como la Unión Europea está posicionada más bien fragmented approach y still optimistic vision. Ellos van a decir, creo yo, que sí, que esa es la manera a seguir adelante y hay que de verdad poco más como con lo que creo que era hasta 2035 que se acaba diesel vehicles y gas, sí, diesel y gas, sí, que ya no se va a vender más, ya como ya estás controlando, pues vale, están ya directamente dando una señal que cualquier vehículo que se venda a partir de 2035 va a tener que ser eléctrico.
Claro.
La pregunta es, ¿de verdad hace falta un vehículo? ¿No? O sea, mandar el planteamiento a vamos a subvencionar para que una persona se pueda comprar un vehículo eléctrico y deje el que tiene. Yo incluso pasaría a preguntar, ¿cómo puedes hacer que el coche que tienes, que te ha durado 20 años y ya te están dando incentivo que no cambie? Vale, las modificaciones quizás no puedes entrar en la ciudad como Múnich porque tienes una contaminación X y no te dejan permitir, pero úsalo hasta que ya no puedas más, ¿no? Y luego otra idea sería como ciudad, que yo creo que las Palmas están haciendo un error garrafal, va mejor pero es todavía fatal, hazla más accesible sin que tengas que yo ir con mi cochito eléctrico. De todas formas, ¿cómo puedes hacer que la gente, incluso de la ciudad alta, ¿no? Estamos en las 7 Palmas, también pueda ir a Las Palmas con el transporte público? Están mejorándolo bastante con las guaguas y demás, y haciendo los carriles bici, pero todavía creo que falta mucho, y el énfasis debería ir más en que tú no te tengas que desplazar con tu vehículo propio, sino intenta desplazarte con un vehículo compartido. Y claro, el lujo es decir eso, pero luego depende mucho de dónde estés y las conexiones que tengas. Y ahí pasa todo un trabajo de, creo, de planificación urbanística, de que de verdad intentes hacer todo lo más conectado posible. Y en Europa, yo que vivo en Múnich, están haciendo un trabajo estupendo. O sea, en Múnich está que no necesitas el coche, está todo tan bien conectado que vas a cualquier sitio con el transporte público. Y es una maravilla. Y de verdad que incluso intentan dejar el centro sin coches absolutamente, que tú los dejes fuera. También aumentando la calidad de vida y patrimonializando más las calles. Así que sí, no sé si respondo a tu pregunta, porque no sé si crees, pero el enfoque de la Unión Europea va a ir más hacia allí, aun si quizás eso no es la solución. Porque lo que quieren es que también, porque si piensas en la mentalidad de los lobbies, yo soy Volkswagen, yo quiero seguir vendiendo coches, tengo que tener números, tengo que argumentar a mis shareholders, que tienen mucho dinero metido, que we're still going to make money, and your dividends are going to be worth it. Entonces, Volkswagen no va a decir, yo, pues en verdad me voy a plantear, voy a parar de hacer coches eléctricos. Así, genial, y va a apoyar a la Unión Europea que siga subvencionando al interés.
Es un caso del libro que tú estás hablando, de la diferencia entre la Europa retórica y la Europa empírica. Todas las iniciativas que han habido para que tú cojas 1000 kilogramos de chatarra, que tienes un coche que tiene 6 o 8 años, pero que puedes seguir viviendo, y simplemente le quites la motorización basada en diésel y le pongas una motorización eléctrica, con lo cual esto ahora en Francia están discutiendo el tema, ¿no? Puede costar al ciudadano una tercera o una cuarta parte de lo que sería un vehículo eléctrico nuevo, serviría para reducir rápidamente la contaminación. No es lo más óptimo, dicen tal, porque es verdad que es cojonudo que tú puedas plantar un vehículo eléctrico, un motor eléctrico sobre una plataforma nueva, sí, pero para una transición y para hacer caso a la idea, ¿no?, de mantener a los materiales circulando en la economía, sumando valor, de repente coger millones y millones de coches y achatarrarlos, evidentemente hay una subordinación clara de las políticas europeas de intereses de las corporaciones. Dices tú a mí ahora que me va, claro, un vehículo eléctrico te puede durar 1 millón de kilómetros y tal, o sea, de repente eso significaría en la práctica una caída drástica en la venta de vehículos. Y creo que ahí está subordinación clara. Europea, americana,
sí, claro.
Mundial. Pero ahí se ve muy claro.
Gracias.
¿Alguna pregunta? ¿Algo más que quieran discutir? Yo digo discutir porque en inglés sí se discutir, pero suena fatal en español.
Yo vengo de medio ambiente, de una carrera de tierra, energía y sostenibilidad, y va mucho por ese lado. No es que todo el mundo en Canarias tenga coche eléctrico, sino cambiar la forma que nos transportan, nos movemos. Todo el tráfico de por la mañana, la mala transporte tanto en la ciudad como fuera. Yo que vengo de Barcelona, ¿no?, que empecé a hacerme guagua, vino y una guagua, hay 3 personas en la guagua. Pero es un poco cambiar el chip de la gente. En Ámsterdam, ¿no?, que es donde yo vivía, la gente no iba en bicicleta y ahora es un lujo, ¿no? Estar en Holanda y aparte de los trenes eléctricos, lo que tú dices, no necesitas un coche para nada. Entonces es como cambiar más, no la cosa, sino la forma en que usamos las cosas, la ropa, la forma en que compramos, todo lo que ponía aquí de degrowth.
Sí.
Hay una parte, ¿no?, de less consumption y demás.
Sí, básicamente que es el discurso este de Reformist Circular Society and Transformational Circular Society.
Porque si todos, o sea, es como la idea de todos en Gran Canaria, por ejemplo, todos en Gran Canaria con una casa individual, todos en Gran Canaria con un coche. Al final es un espacio, el ejemplo de Gran Canaria que tenemos aquí, un espacio reducido, que no vas a hacer nada sostenible, no vas a ayudar nada a la economía circular. Si todo el mundo tiene que tener su coche, o sea, como muy individualista. Y lo que te quería preguntar es, switching to English, You've been talking about legislations, policies, strategies, and I don't know if this has to do with what you study, or what the EU is capable of, but I was wondering all of this, if it has something towards education. Because when you're talking about all of these things, I keep thinking it's really hard to change this lifestyle, it's really hard to go to a circular economy if the countries of Europe is not working at a base level on what this means.
Yeah,
You
well, again, it's more, of course, as you see here, it's more of a top-down approach. And yes, of course, I think the EU, if we see on the what, there were some strategies, right? The different strategies I could not put all, but there is work within those strategies, for example, for textiles, of raising awareness of how we could do to avoid that textile ended up in landfill. But I think it's still a bit of hypocrisy because the EU wants to raise awareness, fine. And perhaps there are some programs in place. Of course, it's not the EU job, I would say, to create that awareness, but it's up to the member states and their own policies.
So it's the country's
National,
thing.
at a national level and then regional level. The EU sets the direction and it's up to you to continue. I recommend. Some are binding, some are non-binding. The majority are non-binding. But the hypocrisy would be that I feel for textiles, what I've heard. Yes, it's fine. You keep them in Europe, but as long as once they are discarded, they end up in landfill and they push that rubbish to somewhere else, right? Let's say Kenya or some African countries, but they don't have the appropriate disposal. And that's really shitty because you shift the problem to somewhere else. And this has been done. China reacted. Back then, we had the famous case of China. China said, wow, you're handing us tons and tons of plastics for us to process and do something with it. You're handing us your problem to us. Deal you with your problem. I'm not getting anything else from you. And that created a huge change for the EU to say, okay, we really need to put in place more recycling infrastructure as China's not buying it from us. But perhaps Malaysia, Indonesia, they still buy it, right? So they still deliver it there. And I've been in Indonesia, and it's really shitty because Indonesia does not have infrastructure in place. And it's very sad to see that the EU, of course, we want to be clean, we want to be green, and it's very nice if you don't see it. It's someone else's problem. And I get it, you can deliver it, it favors trade, fine. Indonesia's happy, you're happy, but make that Indonesia can actually deal with the problem, not make them another problem. Right?
Because now that you're talking about textiles, that I keep thinking everyone is buying tons of clothes from Shein and things from Temu, and it's like the most pollutant thing, the way they produce it, and it's going. There's more people buying Shein than Zara, Inditex, no, they look at that. And people are buying in a really
consumerism way.
The question is, who do you blame? Do you blame
exactly, like, is this
the
gonna
individual
work?
or do you blame the business?
But I wonder if all the strategies work, if the people are just changing to a more consumeristic
I guess
lifestyle.
they have to be more restrictive. I think that we have to move, and that's what is happening. We have to move towards more planned circularity, and that's already happening. And really put more coercive pressures, more regulations, and that they are binding. For example, we have here, if you go here, sorry, I'm jumping all around, but if you go to the legislation, give me 1 second, legislation. Right to repair directive. Apple had a huge problem with that right to repair directive because they didn't make it easy their iPhone to be repaired.
Yeah.
Only an Apple certified person can repair it. That's a option. But someone else has to be able to repair it. Also, this common charger directive. Why do I have an iPhone? I only can charge it with my iPhone charger. But now Apple was under huge pressure. And Europe said, you want to be in business in Europe? Well, then adapt your charges. And that's already putting a lot of pressure onto a big company that has, now it is changing because the US said they don't care. But Europe cares. Okay, so why do it for the US, for Europe and not for the US? We change everything. So they have power, but still limited.
Like an anecdote, I've got a phone before this. I had a phone that is called Fairphone.
Fairphone, yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool because you have it and you have all the nails and you can put it out and you can fix it in your house.
Yeah, yourself.
And it's like, if you can do it with Fairphone, you can do it with any of the other phones. So it's changing.
Yeah, that's where the right to repair tries to push.
See, like, look, as you said, the companies don't want you to repair the phone. The
Oh, no.
companies want you to buy the car and buy it.
I think, Sergio, thank you very much for your input. Sergio, I think tú tenías una pregunta.
Sí, una fantástica presentación. Un lujo tenerte por aquí para la universidad, para todos y además como decía Matías, ¿no? Teniendo tu pasado que estuviste por aquí, por estos lares, saliendo de aquí, nos hace sentir muy orgullosos, muy contentos. Y tengo dos preguntitas. La primera es, tú como persona comprometida, que evidentemente lo vives, lo sientes y además experta en el tema, ¿no? Muchas veces desde fuera de la Unión Europea, de Asia o Norteamérica, a veces dicen, bueno, si Europa no se está pegando un tiro del pie, ¿no? Con ciertas, ¿no? Green Deal y muchas políticas acorde, ¿no? En el sentido de pérdida de competitividad, ¿no? Bueno, pues si tenemos empresas muy punteras en automoción, etc. Y claro, con el escenario que planteabas, resulta que materias primas o producción de ciertos elementos clave como baterías, etc., pues hay otras regiones, ¿no? Geopolíticas con mucho más poder. Y lo mismo en cuanto a innovación tecnológica, ¿no? Bueno, toda la parte de grandes empresas punteras mundiales de innovación tecnológica, pues no están precisamente en Europa, ¿no? No son las que están marcando un poco el ritmo. Entonces, ¿cuál es tu perspectiva, ¿no? Tu opinión en este marco de esas políticas europeas, en ese contexto de competitividad, y si esas medidas, como dicen algunos, ¿no? Desde esas otras áreas geográficas, no pueden al final hacer que Europa pierda competitividad, porque empeoremos mucho en calidad de vida, ¿no? Porque al final todo esto determina que si vas perdiendo camino y recorrido, pues evidentemente vas a estar en unas condiciones mucho peores para los ciudadanos, ¿no? Esa sería la primera pregunta, así muy más genérica, ¿no? Ni siquiera está un poco geopolítica. Y la segunda, también como investigador, ya que tienes el rol ese dual, ¿cuáles crees que serían, vinculándolo al turismo, las principales líneas de investigación o los principales aspectos en los que los investigadores tendríamos que centrarnos dentro de lo que es el tópico que has comentado hoy y el sector específico del turismo?
A ver, tenemos tiempo. Sí. Son las 53, como se tienen que ir, que tengo una reunión. Vale. Entonces, recapitulando tu pregunta, si te entendí bien, básicamente me estás preguntando cuál es mi opinión en cuanto a cómo Europa puede seguir siendo competitiva en todos sus aspectos, viendo cómo los demás mantienen su competitividad independientemente de lo que haga Europa o no. Me estás preguntando de qué es lo que opino de si eso va a perjudicar su competitividad. Yo creo que está todo por ver y que al final todos están, o sea, el mundo está cambiando mucho. Yo creo que vamos de un mundo donde yo aprendí a ver en el colegio de que la globalización es la clave, la globalización es lo que hace que no nos, hablando mal, etcétera, los unos a los otros, porque si tú me haces esto, pues yo pues entonces ya te dejo el cacao, te dejo el café, lo que sea. Y gracias a eso tenemos una estabilidad cierta en Europa. Claro, luego vino Rusia y dijo, me da igual todo, yo invado Ucrania. Y ahí también puso en jaque a la Unión Europea y dijo, vale, es que estábamos siendo, al menos Alemania, sobre todo yo hablo también de la perspectiva de Alemania, muy reliant en Alemania para el natural gas, el gas natural, y está comprometiendo toda nuestra transición energética. Yo creo que fue como eso el desencadenante para que Europa dijera, tenía que pasar algo así, desgraciadamente, para que Europa diga, no, venga, vamos a invertir más en renovables y dejar el gas natural, ver cómo Francia nos puede apoyar más también con la energía nuclear, quizás volver a plantear el tema de la energía nuclear, porque de aquí a que la energía nuclear se puede ir por las ramas, sea no radiactiva, ¿no? Que fue ese invento de que en vez de splitting the atoms con los átomos y no generas la radioactividad. Entonces yo creo que, volviendo al punto de lo que comentaba, estamos pasando de globalización a proteccionismo y yo creo que más o menos todos lo están haciendo de alguna manera u otra y no sé si va a beneficiar a Europa o no, pero yo lo que sí sé es que Europa va por el buen camino planteándose ya, por ejemplo, con el Critical Raw Materials Act, diciendo, vale, que China tiene mucho control, China tiene mucho poder de decisión, como es que nos va a pasar como en Europa, como con Rusia, van a decidir si te vamos a dar una cantidad de minerals o no, Critical Raw Materials, y claro, ¿qué pasa? Que si tú tienes un plan para ser climate neutral hasta 2050, necesitas crear todas esas renewable energies to power the transition, pues vas a estar todavía como en jaque con China un poco dependiendo porque tus recursos en verdad propios no tienes, pero quizás con la economía circular puedes tener una cantidad, pero yo no creo que sea la suficiente para power up todo, así que vas a estar como adopando, ¿no? Intentando asegurar lo tuyo, más lidiando con la geopolítica con China y bueno.
Un pequeño detalle,
Sí.
La idea es que en un continente sin recursos naturales, tú tienes que hacer una transición económica para que por diseño los recursos naturales que están contenidos en los productos tú los puedas recuperar, y ya explicaba, ¿no? Y eso te va a hacer más competitivo si, y es lo que exigen las corporaciones, toda esa transformación tecnológica se hace con ayuda pública. Y es lo que está ocurriendo. Entonces, en el aspecto concreto de la economía circular, a las corporaciones europeas les ayuda a ser más competitivos en el largo plazo. A ellas. Ahora, ahí hay transferencia de recursos públicos a las cuentas de resultados de estas empresas. En este tema. Y la justificación, que esto es la parte que tú decías antes, en la teoría económica del desarrollo, esto es una historia canónica de, bueno, ¿hasta dónde coño se justifica una subvención? Se justifica hasta el punto de vista social. Cuando hay una industria naciente, tú necesitas hacerla desarrollar para innovar por un lado y abaratar por otro. Entonces, la subvención de las industrias nacientes está justificada hasta el punto en que la ganancia de productividad gracias a la subvención compense en el largo plazo el coste de la empresa. Claro. Entonces, se supone que sí. Teoría, pues ya coño, esto pues, se lleva a la práctica pues, dependiendo de las presiones, ¿no? Pero estaría justificada. Otra cosa distinta es si la subvención, si el ritmo, ¿no? Que ha representado el gasto europeo de los programas estos de tal y cual se puede sostener, evidentemente no, y ya sabemos que no, se está grabando y tal, ¿no? Y ya se decía el tema, ¿no? Los países que hayan aprovechado toda esa financiación para hacer sus deberes y saltar a economías más competitivas en un mundo globalizado, van a aprovechar, por los que no lo hayan hecho van a estar jodidos. Y en nuestro caso, yo creo que estaría caer un poquito más del otro lado, ¿no? De los otros sectores, de los que no lo estamos aprovechando. Parece.
Bueno, no sé si me quiero.
¿Perdón?
No sé si todo lo tengo mal también. Yo siento mucho haber llegado tarde, tuve un bucle de temas de que no funcionaba la firma electrónica, no sé qué, y al final me metí en un bucle y no sabía la hora que era las 2. O sea, yo pido disculpas. Una reflexión que yo creo que puede ser relevante en español.
Sí, te entiendo español, lo que pasa es que cuando entras en inglés ya te aprovecho material.
Sí, a mí me gusta el inglés, pero yo soy nativo de español, no digo. What I understand, there are 3 different meanings related to being competitive. One of them is to be better than others. That is the crucial, the key meaning when we deal with this environment. But it's true there are a second meaning that I would like to acknowledge, and is to be responsible for something. Responsibility, social responsibility, sustainability, and so on. And in this way, we care about how our actions affect others, and that is the second meaning. And I think the European Union is playing a role, and we are leading this path, in comparison to the States, Japan, and other countries. And being competitive is also to be skilled, highly qualified, and so on. And I think that is important in Europe as well. What I mean is being competitive. Competence is not only we should overcome that unidimensional approach by acknowledging the polysemic meaning related to this, being responsible, care about how your action affects others, and being highly qualified and being educated. And I think Europe is quite good at this. Estos tres significados son español y inglés, ¿no? Es decir, que es polisémico, y yo sé que en el ambiente de la